Great. Well, thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here. And every time I come speak, I'm just really impressed with everything that's happening with people getting educated on this issue and being really, I hope, inspired. What I'm about to talk about is not, sometimes it can feel overwhelming, wireless radiation, but there is so much going on. And as you listen to this talk about technology, please know that change is happening. People are organizing in their communities, making changes in their home and making their homes safer, their communities safer. And you can go to Environmental Health Trust to learn more. That's EHTRUST. And we have talks on YouTube where you can just continue getting educated on this rather complicated issue, but really not that complicated, because in fact, it's the same to food, drugs, everything else, our environment, where big companies are, have taken the reins, and people's health and the environment are sort of being left behind and not considered because of money. So let me share with you, especially if you're new to this issue. I'm going to share my screen. Oops. Okay. So the first thing, and I learned about this issue 10 years ago. I thought for sure that cell phones, wireless devices were perfectly safe, because could they be sold if they weren't safe? I believe that government agencies were protecting me, and that wireless devices were absolutely fine for my kids. But of course, I had no idea that my devices even emitted anything. I mean, wireless radiation is invisible. You can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't hear it, although some people can actually hear clicks, which would be another talk. But wireless devices all emit a kind of non-ionizing radiation. Radio frequency radiation, it's microwaves, and you're going to hear a lot of words to describe what your cell phones and all wireless devices emit. And I'm going to kind of go over that a little bit, but it's invisible energized waves. Your cell phone, laptops, computers, Wi-Fi router, access points, tablets, video game consoles, Wi-Fi printers, cordless phones, earpods, anything Wi-Fi, anything Bluetooth. You almost can't buy anything now unless it has Wi-Fi in it. All of that is wireless radiation, and it creates emissions which are in the air, and it's absorbed into your body. Yet we see commercials like this, learn how to get gig Wi-Fi. What they don't tell you is that there's frequencies, data carrying waves coming off of all of these devices that is absorbed into our bodies. It's the same as microwave radiation. It's a type of microwave radiation, but not at heating levels, because obviously you wouldn't want to heat up your brain. And the scientists and the officials that set limits way back decades ago set safety standards which really help the technology to work, but did not address the non-heating impacts from wireless radiation. These are artificial frequencies. It is not the same as the sun, although you might hear, oh, the sun emits electromagnetic radiation. These are information carrying waves. So there's a frequency and data carried on the wave. That video you watch, the Instagram, the pictures you snap, those are all moving invisibly through the air and into our bodies. Radio frequency radiation is the term for this swatch of frequencies. It's non-ionizing. That means it's not the same as an X-ray or atomic bomb radiation. It doesn't directly damage DNA. However, it has serious adverse effects at low levels because you don't have to directly ionize the atoms in order to have an impact. And it's digital. pulsed waves, completely not natural. Here's some examples of sources. This is a quote unquote small cell increasingly being put in front of homes in communities. Here are antennas on top of buildings. Now, in 2011, the World Health Organization, International Agency for Research on Cancer, classified wireless radio frequency as possibly carcinogenic to humans. That was a decade ago now, over a decade. And that was based on science, on studies on humans that found the people who used cell phones to their heads had increased risks in case control studies of glioma, a type of malignant brain cancer. And there also was studies that found oxidative stress. Not enough animal studies at that time, although there are many animal studies that existed, but there weren't the kind of carefully controlled, highly credible animal studies that this group wanted to see in order to bring it up a notch to probable or proven carcinogen, which is the other determinations that the World Health Organization has. So, for example, air pollution, you hear was deemed a carcinogen, a proven carcinogen. And that was after hundreds of thousands of people were the statistics that had been harmed by air pollution. So whenever you get a determination of this is a carcinogen by those authorities that we all often look to, it takes many, many bodies, much statistics, which are our bodies. Our bodies are the statistics, and we have to prove it with our bodies, which is, of course, unacceptable because we should be working on prevention. So brain cancer, acoustic neuroma, that's a kind of a tumor, which is not a cancer, but can impact your life in many ways. And thyroid cancer has now been associated with wireless radiation by the study by Yale, funded by the American Cancer Society, that just came out a few years ago. Breast cancer in women who place the cell phone in their bras, which many, many people do, has been linked to wireless radiation. And also there was a study done where they looked at women who use the cell phone near their chest. And so not just tucked against in the bra, but also just right up to the chest, which is how many people text these days. And they found increased risk for breast cancer. So decades ago, when the US government they set limits for what was an acceptable amount of exposure to radio frequency radiation from cell phones or cell towers. And they didn't have research on long-term exposure. There was no pre-market safety testing. And the FDA asked for a study, a large-scale animal study, to look at what would be the impacts to animals exposed to very low non-heating levels. And they found clear evidence of cancer in the hearts of male rats, and evidence of tumors, malignant gliomas, and tumors in the adrenal glands in certain groups of the male rats. They also found in both the rats and mice DNA damage. However, this study has been downplayed by authorities, by groups that have longstanding industry ties. And after this study came out, if you even read about it online, it looks as if, well, rats are not humans. You can't take this animal study and compare it to humans. This was a $30 million study, carefully controlled, so that those animals didn't have heating levels of microwave radiation. And they found cancer and DNA damage. Dr. Linda Birnbaum, who was at the time of the study being undertaken, the director of the National Toxicology Program, as well as the National Institutes of Environmental Health Sciences, and she submitted a statement in an amicus brief in our case. We actually ended up having to sue the federal government, which I'll talk about, talking about how these findings demonstrate the potential for radiofrequency radiation to cause cancer in humans. And now many scientists are stating that the science is conclusive to show that wireless radiation, radiofrequency radiation, is a human carcinogen. Here's one study, cancer epidemiology update, because of course you might say, well, is the World Health Organization going to relook at this? Are they going to look at the latest science? And in addition to the NTP study, there are many other studies on oxidative stress, impacts to the brain, and so forth. There hasn't been a reconvening of that expert group. In fact, they have been advised by their advisory group to do so, but until they do, it hasn't happened. But this paper says if they were to meet again, it meets criteria to be a human carcinogen. And this is Dr. Leonard Hardell, who worked on DDT, Agent Orange, and many environmental exposures. And he has been publishing and giving talks. You can look him up online, read his papers stating RF, EMF, radiofrequency, electromagnetic fields should be regarded as carcinogenic to humans, classifying it as a group 1 according to the International Agency for Research on Cancer, IR classification. And he has a organization, the Environment and Cancer Research Foundation, where you can also see his papers and so forth. The cancer is actually just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to non-ionizing electromagnetic radiation and wireless radiation. There's many studies finding genotoxicity, damage to memory, sperm and reproduction impacts, synergistic effects, so that the toxins that we're exposed to every day in our food, in our air, that it can be even more impactful when you have the combined exposure of a known carcinogen and non-ionizing electromagnetic radiation, wireless radiation. And there's studies that have looked at very, very low levels of cell phone radiation, combined it with ionizing radiation, and found a increased tumors in the animals that were exposed to both at one time. And yet what we're told is that there's going to be more enjoyment, more sharing, Wi-Fi for everyone. Now, the European Parliament has a study, Health Impact of 5G, which you can go online and just search it and you'll find it. And there's also talks by Dr. Fiorella Belpoggi about this paper. And their conclusions were for the commonly used frequencies that are used in 2G and 3G and 4G, that they are probably carcinogenic, not possibly, probably, and in particular related to gliomas and acoustic neuromas. And there are reproductive developmental effects, which it says these frequencies clearly affect male fertility and possibly female fertility too. And they may have possible adverse effects on the development of embryos, fetuses, and newborns. And there is several studies that we have on our website, Environmental Health Trust, on latest reviews on impacts to fertility and the endocrine system. And it really is quite extensive, the literature that's been amassed. And at this point, all they have to do is put these shiny screens up and people salivate. I mean, we're addicted to these devices and completely uninformed about the science and what you can do to make technology safer, because there's so many things we could do. It doesn't have to be all wireless all the time. In fact, these very devices we can use in much safer ways with Ethernet cords and wires, and they don't have to be that we're always being radiated all the time. Dr. Deborah Davis, who's president of Environmental Health Trust, has a very important book, Disconnect, and several other books, of course, The Secret History of the War on Cancer. If you haven't read that, I so recommend that incredible history of the many environmental exposures we're exposed to and how authorities have known safer technologies and how, that organic food was safer and so forth. And yet that's all been pushed aside, and we're focused on treatments rather than prevention. But Disconnect, the truth about cell phone radiation, is an incredible book about wireless radiation and the wargaming of the science. And we're also right now doing an update to that, which will take us through 5G and Wi-Fi and to the current to current times. But you can read this book and read about all the scientists whose science has been attacked when they find effects. And highly recommend this book. There has been decades of research. And yet here we are. I have two daughters who are teenagers. This is a typical situation. Maybe there'd be even more devices. You got the laptop on the lap, the cell phone right in front of the face, cell phones pressed against the abdomen. And where can we go where we don't see devices in our children's hands or in our hands? And yet, remember, when cigarettes were presented as fresh and physicians would promote cigarettes, and it's promoted for pregnant women. In fact, they would talk about how, hey, maybe women want babies with low birth weight. This advertisement says, taste isn't the only reason I smoke. People are always telling me that smoking causes low birth weight. Talk about a win-win. An easy labor, a slim baby, and the full flavor of Winston's. So this same story is being repeated again. And the book Captured Agency by Harvard compares the wireless industry to the tobacco industry. The United States Federal Communications Commission, that's the agency that is tasked to be addressing this issue, is a captured agency, argues this report by Harvard. There's a revolving door between industry and government, and US Congress receives millions from industry. In fact, if you have, I think many people on the call have gone to their elected officials to raise this issue, and yet we don't hear anything about it. Nothing is happening at the federal level, which it should be. We should be talking about this in all the hearings. Why, when there's an oversight hearing for the FCC, why aren't we hearing about the ignoring that's happening about this health and environmental risk? The wireless companies are using the same playbook as big tobacco. Now, here's an example of how captured the FCC is. You have Ajit Pai, former FCC chair, former counsel for Verizon; Brendan Carr, FCC commissioner, former lawyer for Wiley Ryan, who represented the industry, the wireless industry, when the wireless industry sued the city of San Francisco for their cell phone right to know law. And then Jonathan Adelstein, who used to be an FCC commissioner, now CEO of the Wireless Infrastructure Association. Meredith Baker, who's now head of the Wireless Association, the most largest wireless industry lobby group in the United States, and former FCC commissioner. Michael Powell, former FCC commissioner, and now CEO of the NCTA, and Tom Wheeler, who previous to Ajit Pai was the FCC chair, who was the former chief lobbyist for the CTIA Wireless Association. So it's this revolving door, and this happens at every level, at local and state levels as well. So the Harvard report concludes that consumer safety, health, and privacy, along with consumer wallets, have all been overlooked, sacrificed, or rated due to unchecked industry influence. And it's these hard roll tactics that we call 20th century big tobacco tactics. And that's Norm Alster, who is the reporter for the Harvard Center for Ethics. And it's not just the United States, by the way. So this is the former CEO of Vodafone, telecommunication company, and he's now Italy's Minister for Technological Innovation and Digital Transition. And here you have him as the head of Vodafone accepting an award, and here he was on the board of directors of the company Verizon, which took over an area of Vodafone. Then we have Paul Fletcher, former director of corporate and regulatory affairs for Optus. That's an Australian telecommunications company. Now, Australia's Minister for Communications, Urban Infrastructure, Cities and the Arts. Abdullah Muhammad, who worked for telecom companies for years before he was appointed general manager, National Communications Authority of Somalia. In fact, I could have gone on. I found myself digging into this right before this talk and had to take a pause on that, but it just goes on and on and on. And yet, what about our children? The limits that we have for wireless radiation that were set decades ago in 1996, based on science from even earlier, based, by the way, on a handful of animal studies where they heated them up with microwaves and said, oh, this is the level. They had a temperature, a rectal thermometer, and never looked at long-term exposures, but had these intense short-term exposures. Those never considered the impacts to children, who are, of course, more sensitive. They have a developing brain. The limits that we have are based on a large adult man with a big head. These limits have not changed for 25 years. This is a large head. It's called the SAM. You'll hear it referred to as SAM, but it's the standard anthropomorphic man. When devices are brought to market, with drugs, you get some tests. Of course, it's an inadequate process that the FDA has, but they have a series of tests. When it comes to phones, they have these tests with phones where they just check, does it heat up the brain inside this big plastic head, 11 pounds, 220-pound man. They actually have a body phantom too, 6 feet, 2 inches tall. This is the 10% of US military recruits in 1989 that the model, the phantom that is used to test phones is based on. And they share these tests that show that the head is not heated up to a certain degree. And that's the test that's used to test cell phones. And here's another picture from it's an industry conference in Barcelona. And here you have the specific of the SAM. Here's another picture of the test system. And inside these heads, these big heads, they have a thick liquid that supposedly mimics the brain. It's a homogeneous liquid. It's not a liquid like your actual brain is, which is varying tissues of varying electrical, the conductivity varies. And also in the real brain, and they've shown this, they've actually looked at cow brains and exposed cow brains to microwave radiation and found that the radiation there can be hot spots in different ways that the microwaves move through the tissue. You think about when you put your food in a microwave oven, it doesn't heat that food in the same way, right? Sometimes you get these hot spots. It's cold on one side and warm on the other. Well, what's going on? So the way we test phones is absolutely inadequate it doesn't represent how the radiation moves through our brain. So let me show you an example by a scientist that we work with, Claudio Fernandez and colleagues, of the cell phone to the head. And this is imaging that uses kind of like a heat map. The colors represent the rate of absorption into the brain. So here we have the white and yellow as the highest intensities. Then it goes to purple and blue. And you can see this radiation is absorbed into the brain. And when it comes to children, they have more intense exposures deeper into their brain and more exposure from the same device. More of their brain is exposed because, of course, they have smaller heads. So the radiation doesn't have as long to go to get to memory centers and important brain centers. And this is an adult head and a child's head. And this has been published over the years. Many papers have documented this, including the World Health Organization references what I'm about to share with you in terms of facts about cell phone radiation into the brain. Children have 2 to 3 times higher cell phone radio exposure into their brain, up to 10 times higher cell phone radiation absorption into the skull, 2 to 5 times higher cell phone radiation absorption into their eyes. And this is a study that looked at a virtual reality where they place a phone into a device, you put it up to your head, and children are being handed these in schools, Google Cardboard or these virtual reality systems, but what about the impacts to the developing eye? And of course, children will have a lifetime of exposure. Unlike adults, I'm 50, so I remember what life was like. I've only really heavily used phones for a decade, and yet our children are exposed before they are born. And they might not be using cell phones, but this was me with my baby. I had a cell phone, put it right here. In fact, I tucked it right into the little snuggly, completely unaware. And we're using phones all the time. That cell phone radiation is going into her brain, and it's also going into the child's brain. And yet we're told lots to love, less to spend, they say, but actually the market for wireless technology is just blasting off. So it's not just phones, right? There's all kinds of devices. A few more facts about cell phones. There was 0 pre-market safety tests for long-term health effects when cell phones came on the market. There was not pre-market safety testing, as you would expect. There's 0 US agencies that have reviewed the totality of the science. Even if you put together what agencies were working on this, of which there are only 2, which I'll talk about, there's been no review of the totality of the science. And these are straight facts. You can go to our website at ehtrust.org to get the documentation. There's a GAO report. If you actually take the time to look, as I'm going to talk about, to our federal agencies, you'll see that there's no reports or white papers. Where's the report on the impacts related to oxidative stress? Where's the reports on the impacts to the developing brain? And there's 0 budget by US agencies to research health effects to children. And right now, after that $30 million study, the only thing that's happening, and there's not a budget line item, is that the National Toxicology Program is doing some additional research on wireless radiation. But we don't have an extensive research program as you would expect. In fact, if wireless radiation were a drug, as Dr. Deborah Davis says, it would be banned. There's so many side effects that are being reported, yet there's no process by even which to get that information monitored or put together for people to even review, because there's not measuring being done. And here, this is completely typical situation where the phone is right near the baby. Babies have thinner skulls. The other thing to know about our tests, it's a complete scam. We have these large adult heads, and phones are placed against an ear spacer. See, this little thing is actually a spacer. They're not actually tested the way we might use them against the body. And there's even images, I should have put it here, where we have phones that are pressed up against the head, put in hats. Boys put them in their hats they don't have a purse, so they stick them in the hats, and they're not tested that way. The way we test devices is outdated and completely irrelevant. It's only based on heat. These tests were developed pre-1996, but set in 1996. And that spacer makes for a serious situation, which I'm going to talk about now. So what I'm showing you is an image of testing that was done by the French government. They tested hundreds of cell phones. And you see this space. This is actually the body phantom. And they put the phone into this test system. And there's a space here, 5 millimeters, for the Apple iPhone 11. When the government of France, the French testing agency, ANFR, they did SAR tests, which are specific absorption rate tests, on over 400 phones. And they found that when they tested them at body contact, which is not this test, I'm sorry, I don't have a picture where the phone is touching the test system, which is a bad test system, but nonetheless, that's what they use. They found that most of them violated the regulatory limits that they had. So in 2016, actually, I have the date a little off. It was proposed, but it's actually, sorry. the directive changed, and now they changed the test distance to 5 millimeters as the maximum allowed distance. They still allow a distance, but in the United States, we have devices, cell phones, which are actually tested at 15. They have a 15 millimeter separation. They are not tested. They're not tested touching the body. We have a much larger distance that's allowed. In 2019, Professor Om Gandhi, who helped set the limits that we have now in the United States, published a paper in the IEEE that found that if phones were tested at body contact, those ANFR phones, according to the way the US FCC tests phones and to our regulatory limits, that the violations of the regulatory limits will be up to 11 times. And in France, 30 models of cell phones have been software updated or removed from the market because of these excesses. Here's another example of the separation that's typically used. Now, in the United States, the US FCC is completely ignoring this reality that phones are not tested in body contact. And we have been writing and sending that information, and yet the FCC is stating that even if the phones exceed government limits, that it's still safe because they have such a big safety margin, which you can go online and learn more about how we address that issue. There is no safety margin. There's no 50-fold safety margin. So when you have a cell phone in your pocket, you're actually getting that phone pressed against in your shirt pocket or your pants pocket is exposing the body to wireless radiation. And by the way, even if you exceed our regulatory limits, they are not protective. They're absolutely outdated and non-protective. So this is imaging done showing the exposures from a phone in a pocket by Claudio Fernandez and colleagues in Brazil, engineers in Brazil. The Cleveland Clinic had issued recommendations saying it's best to keep your cell phone far away from the testes as you can. Now, interestingly, some of those recommendations came down off the website, been a little revamped, but if you take the time to read the papers that Cleveland Clinic fertility experts have published, they talk about the research that has shown effects. And there's been so many studies now recently, systematic reviews that find radiofrequency radiation can harm sperm, several just published last year and this year actually, and also that it can impact reproductive hormones, decreasing testosterone. Here's another image of what we see all the time. So what about tablets? This is imaging that looked at the tablet and head of a child. And this is showing the way the wave moves. It doesn't end right here. This is just showing the propagation pattern. And you can see here the colors representing the intensity of the absorption into the body of a 6-year-old with a tablet in front of their head, close. And yet here's what we'll often see, advertisements. Here's an AT&T advertisement where they are saying, even though you can't be with your kids or grandkids, you can still be part of these important moments like story time with the Caribou app. We need laps, not apps, real books. This is imaging done showing a laptop on the lap and the way the wave is moving off of the device and being absorbed into the body. And you can go on to we actually have on YouTube the scientist Claudio Fernandez talking about the studies that he's done in imaging showing, making the invisible visible, showing the wireless radiation and how it moves through space and moves into our bodies. And yet this is what we see all the time. Our kids, we are not being informed about this radiation, that we should not have these devices in body contact. In fact, the iPhone 13 says in the manual that they are tested again when worn or carried against the torso with a 5 millimeter separation. And yet most people haven't read their manual to know this. Now, they very sneakily say iPhone is evaluated in positions that simulate uses against the head. But those uses against the head, remember, use the spacer of the ear. And also, of course, the safety standards that we have that all phones, be it Apple or Samsung, use are not protective of our health. And here's a commercial by Apple. I got Hollywood in your pocket. I mean, they have images of these devices in the pockets without informing us. Here's Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 3 5G. And it says in the manual, deep in the manual, body-worn SAR testing has been carried out at a separation distance of 1.5 centimeters. To meet RF exposure guidelines during body-worn operation, the device should be positioned at least this distance away from the body. Here's some yoga pants. Girls are tucking these devices right into their spandex pants, and actually sometimes inside, right? If you don't have a pocket, you just stick it right in the spandex right there, completely unaware. We're told live life on 4G. Now, if you want to find out how to find your cell phone's fine print warning on an Apple iPhone, you go to Settings, General, About, Legal, RF Exposure, and that's a really nice trick to share with your friends. If you're trying to share this information, you can say, hey, let's whip out your phone. Let me show you something. And you find that little regulatory statement, the hidden fine print warnings that state it should be that they emit radiation, radio frequency radiation, and that they should be a certain distance. Why do they have that warning? You can go to our website. We have a ehtrust.org, and you go to the fine print warnings page, and we have a lot of devices that there are fine print warnings posted. You click on each of these and it'll show you what the fine print warning is. And then we have a link to it so that you can see it online on the Apple website. Most people are unaware. Most people are unaware that video game consoles emit wireless radiation. Here's what the Xbox 360 says in the manual. A separation distance of at least 20 centimeters must be maintained between the antenna of this device and all persons. I went to a friend's house and walked in with my wireless radiation meter and found that their son, the teenage son, had all of these consoles that were right near his bed. They were radiating all the time, even when you're not using them. That's a secret of wireless devices. Most of them radiate all the time, even when you're not using it, when you're not talking on the phone, when you're not using the device, it's always radiating. Here we have the Apple Echo Dot Kids. And it says the device should be installed and operated with a minimum distance of 20 centimeters between the radiator and your body. Marketed just like food, right? Alexa, open the story of Lucky Charms. Alexa, play Freeze Dance. These are marketed to our kids, and no one's informing the parents nor the kids that they emit wireless radiation and that there's supposed to be a distance to meet the outdated standards that we have. Amazon Echo, how many people have one of these in your home? This device should be installed and operated with a minimum distance of 20 centimeters between the radiator and your body, says the manual. Your Apple Watch, which says, when placing Apple Watch near your face, keep at least 10 millimeters of separation to ensure exposure levels remain at or below at tested levels. That's from model A1153. It's always changing, and you can go online to see what the fine print warning is. But again, if you keep that distance, it doesn't mean safety. It's just like with food. We have all of this food, which is on the market, completely legal to be sold. And yet it has, levels of chemicals and pesticides and contaminants which are not protective, which are too high and harmful. So we don't have federally developed safety standards in the United States for wireless radiation. We have limits. They're sometimes called safety standards, but they're not federal safety standards because actually no U.S. agency developed them. Like for lead. The US EPA is, over time, I know they've changed. It used to be you were allowed to consume so much lead or have a certain amount of lead in the blood. And now they've slowly, there's more research, and it needs to be like far more research than should have been needed, because we knew a long time ago that lead was harmful to the brain. But the government agencies set these thresholds. But in the US, we actually adopted limits based on industry groups' recommendations. We didn't develop them. US agencies didn't develop them. The EPA was actually developing safety standards, and they were fully defunded in 1996 when the Telecom Act was passed. And we adopted these guidelines. And then they were reaffirmed in 2019. The FCC said, we looked at the 1996 limits for cell phones, cell towers, wireless radiation, and we don't need to change them. They had an inquiry, which is it's when the government agencies open up and they say, we want comments, should we change these limits or not? There were over 10,000 pages of scientific research and evidence placed on that record. Experts, scientists, medical organizations saying, we need to relook at this. The American Academy of Pediatrics said, this needs to be looked at. We need limits that protect children and pregnant women. And the FCC ignored most of that information. So we ended up, our organization, as well as several others, filed against the FCC on this issue. And we actually had a favorable ruling in our case, which I'll talk about. But that's the state of our limits. And in fact, something that should be at the forefront of all of our minds is that these limits were never even set to consider birds, bees, or trees. And there's a 3-part review of the research. And there's many studies that looked at impacts to animals and wildlife. This was published in the Reviews of Environmental Health, and they found, one, there are exponential increases of non-ionizing electromagnetic fields in nearly all environments, and there are wildlife effects that have been found. Orientation, impacting orientation, migration, the ability to find food, reproduction, mating, nest and den building. And the authors, who are esteemed experts, Blake Levitt, who's published several books on this issue, Dr. Henry Lai, and who has extensive publications and did research showing DNA damage, genotoxicity from exposure years ago, and was attacked as a scientist, and Albert Manville, who's a former U.S. Fish and Wildlife biologist, now retired. And they argue that this is a novel form of pollution, and we need rules at regulatory agencies that should designate air as habitat for wildlife so that this exposure can be regulated like other pollutants. And of course, I have this picture of animals resting on the antennas. We have all of these antennas, and birds. This is where birds are. They are in the air. Insects are in the air, and they are being highly exposed to very high levels of wireless radiation. There was a public news service report, also Santa Fe, New Mexican, published a report on impacts to wildlife. And I'll quote Dr. Albert Manville in this article, Research Suggests Cell Tower Radiation Harms Wildlife. He says, we have 5G rolling out now in massive quantities without due diligence to determine, are these sources of radiation safe, not only for humans, but for wildlife? And the answer is no, they are not. There's research on bees that's found reduced motor activity of worker bees, biochemical changes indicating stress, the piping signal, decline in colony strength and queen egg laying rate. And here, this image is they're camouflaging them as trees. They're not trees. In fact, and I'm not going to get into this, but this fake tree, which is a cell tower, is creating plastic pollution, because all of this fakeness is actually plastic. And the plastic falls down. they break off. You can go under one of these and pick up. We have videos of people going underneath these fake cell towers, and there's all these plastic needles, again, polluting the earth, our water, our food, ultimately. So in our case, which our case against the FCC for these outdated safety limits, Environmental Health Trust et al. Versus the FCC, that was court ruling in 2021 in August by the U.S. Court of Appeals, D.C. Circuit. They stated that the FCC had ignored this science, the non-cancer harms, and they did a mandate to the FCC. The FCC must address and must come back with an explanation for why FCC limits did not need to be updated, specifically addressing the impacts of wireless radiation on children, the implications of long-term exposure to wireless radiation, the ubiquity of wireless devices and other technological developments that have occurred since the Commission last updated its guidelines, and very importantly, the impacts of radio frequency radiation on the environment, on wildlife. We just filed another filing in November and actually also in March. We are calling on the FCC to ensure a review of the latest science and all the developments in the last 2 years since we filed that case, because that was filed in 2019 and the determination was in 2021. But as wild as this may seem, the FCC does not have to look at science after 2019. They could simply make a determination based on 2019 and earlier and not even look at all the latest science. And even in 2021, there's so much science. So we shared a lot of the latest research on thyroid cancer, breast cancer, testosterone, oxidative stress. There was a published review that found the majority of animal and cell studies that looked at exposures within regulatory limits had increased oxidative stress and DNA damage and so forth. And now we're in 5G, and I don't have a time. Oh, it's 10 o'clock. Okay. Now we're in the era of 5G, which is fifth generation wireless. Millions of new cell towers near homes and schools are being proposed, and near where we live, work, and play. This was sent to me by a man. We get sent pictures of cell towers in front of homes by people all the time, and they ask the same question. Is this safe? Am I okay? I'm having issues with my sleep. This just got put up. I mean, here it is, like so close to his bedroom window. This was outside my window when I went to San Francisco. I took this picture. Imagine this bedroom right here. This was my bedroom image, and there it was, and the radiation was very high. I had a meter and measuring it. 5G deployment is about both 5G technology, which is a new kind of way that the frequency will be modulated, a new kind of technology. It's a technological standard. There will be proposed 70.2 million new small cell tower bases by 2025 in the world, almost a million in the United States alone. 500 billion devices are expected to be connected to the internet by 2030, and 8.9 billion mobile phone subscriptions worldwide by 2024. Oops. My phone, I'm sorry. I'm plugging my phone. So 5G will also mean all of these new wireless devices, the Internet of Things, Wi-Fi and Bluetooth speakers, wearables, appliances, and a 700% increase in mobile data traffic globally projected between 2017 and 2022. Now, on our website at ehtrust.org, you can go. We have a fact sheet where we link to all of the industry reports that have these projections. This is a picture by a professor in Pittsburgh who sent me this. This is what is in front of her home, and this is what she sees when she looks out the window. You see the window, and right here, and the radio frequency radiation simulations that she sent me, that the company sent her, all within legal limits. However, higher than I have ever seen in a home. I have never seen simulations that were as high as what she shared with me. The levels which scientists who work on this, independent scientists, say are safe are much, much lower than what our regulatory limits are. So it is unacceptable when you hear, don't worry, it's so low, it's only 1% of FCC limits, or in this case, it was almost 50% of FCC limits, sky high. 0.1% of FCC limits is still too high. We have a lot of work to do. And the question, here's another picture sent to me by a family where they were having sleep problems. This was actually in Mexico. They wanted to know, is it safe? What does the research say? This is absolutely unacceptable. The radiation comes through the window into the living, sleeping space. This is her bedroom. So I'm going to tell you a story. This image you see is called a small cell. It's not that small, is it? It's a light fixture topped with an antenna. You've got electrical boxes. In some cases, you'll see these big boxes on the ground. But this is a small cell popped on a streetlight in California. And the mother, who has 4 kids and wanted to find out, well, is this safe? So she wrote the FCC and had a whole conversation with a lawyer at the FCC, who could not come up with any reports showing safety. He said, it's safe, but yet could never, when she said, well, show me those papers where this has been reviewed for cell tower radiation. And he was unable to do so. And finally, he said, rather exacerbatedly, he said, well, the small cell does not exceed FCC's maximum permissible exposure limits, and they have been deemed safe by the FDA not to show adverse health effects in humans. So she, being determined with her emails, wrote the FDA and said, well, where's safety? Have you looked at the science? What have you found? And the US Food and Drug Administration actually wrote her, the FDA does not regulate cell towers or cell tower radiation. Therefore, FDA has no studies or information on cell towers to provide in response to your questions. And that was by an attorney who's the director of the FDA Office of Policy Center for Devices and Radiological Health. Now, if you go to the FDA, it certainly looks like there's safety. In fact, the word safety is plastered all over the website. But they've actually not looked at 1, cell towers at all, 2, anything but cancer, 3, when they looked at cancer, they did a literature review, which they're putting forward as some sort of health risk assessment, which it's not. It's not a hazard assessment. There's no review of FCC limits in there, actually, even though it's put forward in that way. And as the University of Pittsburgh Law Review put forward in their report, the FCC keeps letting me be why radio frequency radiation standards have failed to keep up with technology. And I quote, the FCC and FDA have failed in their obligation to prescribe safe radio frequency radiation guidelines produced from wireless communication devices to protect the public health and safety. The FDA has not reviewed the science in a systematic way or done a risk evaluation. And they say of the National Toxicology Program that, well, that's about rats and animals, not humans. They completely discount the Ramazzini Institute study, which looked at much lower levels of radiofrequency radiation and found the same tumors as the NTP. So cell tower radiation is an environmental exposure in need of federal accountability. We have completely dropped the ball. There is no agency looking at this issue that has expertise in health and environmental safety. And there are many, many appeals by scientists and doctors on this issue calling for a halt to 5G. I'll quote the 5G appeal to the European Union. 5G will substantially increase exposure to radio frequency electromagnetic fields, RF-EMF, radio frequency radiation electromagnetic fields, that has been proven harmful for humans and the environment. And you can go to their website at 5gappeal.eu and click on the appeal, see the signatories, and learn more about that. The EMF scientist appeal is also online by scientists who have published in the field and are calling for urgent reductions in exposure. This is an image from a published paper published in Environmental Research that was about how these new cell towers, these small cells, they're placed closer to people, and people's bodies, people's heads, than antennas have ever been placed before, resulting in highly elevated exposure levels. Now, what you see here is the Wheaton High School right near me in Maryland. And this is a school, and this is a cell tower right there, right up against the school. Completely legal. Whereas in many communities, you're not allowed to do that. And the Los Angeles, California School District, Palo Alto School District, Westland, Wilsonville, Oregon School Board prohibits cell towers on school property or have resolutions opposed to cell towers to the school. Montgomery County, Maryland now does not have cell towers, no longer will allow cell towers on elementary schools, though they still are sort of having towers proposed for our high schools and middle schools, which is unacceptable. The Prince George's County, Maryland School Board decided not to renew their cell tower master leasing agreement that would have allowed over 60 schools to be marketed as cell tower sites. And Portland, Oregon schools ended allowing more leases for cell towers. All of this happened with parents and teachers that got organized and worked to address this issue. And I'll note that in Los Angeles, they actually have many people don't know about this, but it very much exists, a cautionary level for radio frequency radiation, where they say they try to keep it at below 10,000 times lower than FCC limits. Below 10,000 times lower than FCC limits. They don't follow that completely, but they do say that. And it just highlights how absolutely outrageous our current FCC limits are. This is a picture sent to me of a playground with a cell tower right near it. Whereas in many communities where people are waking up to this, they're working to ensure setbacks for homes and schools for these 5G, 4G facilities. And remember, 5G is going to have more small cells in residential areas, as well as more macro towers to tie it all together, as well as all these devices. So we have all these setbacks that communities have been putting forward: 1,000 feet, 500 feet, 300 feet, and San Diego. And in Washington, D.C., of course, there's no representation, 10 feet. 10 feet is the setback for cell antennas from buildings and home structures. 30 feet in my community. Despite incredible efforts by thousands of people, the city council, as happens across the country, completely ignored the science, ignored people, ignored the drop in property values that would happen, and set an egregious setback of 30 feet. Unacceptable. In many other communities, Shelburne, Massachusetts, 1,500 feet for cell towers. Walnut, California, 1,500 feet. Palo Alto, 1,500 feet for schools. Bar Harbor, Maine, 1,500 feet, and so forth. Many of these more protective ordinances are being attacked by industry with lawsuits, and that is a whole situation. Please join Environmental Health Trust, get on our newsletter to stay up to date. Find your local group. Every state at this point has a group working on smart meters or cell towers or 5G or safe technology. Find a group, join the group, and get updated on what's happening in your community. When people have organized, they've had resolutions to halt 5G, like Keene, New Hampshire. They passed a resolution. Hawaii County, Hawaii, Easton, Connecticut, Farragut City, Tennessee. But what happened in Keene, New Hampshire after they passed it? Industry came in, threatened, legal threats, and they had to reverse that resolution to halt 5G. But now they're working on a wireless ordinance that is protective. And there are many resolutions: Hallandale Beach, Florida; Coconut Creek, Florida; Carmel City, Indiana; Bend, Oregon; Ulster County, New York. You can go to Environmental Health Trust. We have a list of, under the 5G, under key issues, we have a tab on 5G. You can go to local ordinances and get links to all of these and learn what other people are doing in other communities. So we need healthy and sustainable technology. What will be the impact of 5G in our current wireless, the road we're on with wireless? What will be the impact to the earth? What will be the impact to human health, wildlife, the environment? Well, there's also increased energy consumption from all of these devices. The 5G cell towers, we're going to pepper our entire landscape with these new facilities. They all use energy. Also, all of the devices you charge, that uses energy. Report after report has shown that the current rate of energy consumption is only going to increase with all of these new technology we're using. Plus, there's damage to trees, harm to wildlife, human rights abuses in the mining of the minerals used in the devices, and the pollution from the manufacturing, not to mention the worker impacts, the way workers are treated in other countries, in China and Korea, and many countries, it's abuse. It's human rights abuses. And Apple and so forth, they claim they're working on it, but it's very challenging. Well, they say it's very challenging because there's all of these contracting being done, and they can't address they don't know everything that's going on. Well, this could be fixed. And there have been laws put forward to address the human rights abuses, and the companies are not accountable at this point. We do not have strong enough regulations to address this. Plus, there's inadequate recycling. There's this growing mountain of e-waste from all of these devices. And we need to start thinking about the trajectory we're on, and we have to pivot to healthy and safe, sustainable technology. Here's groups that are protesting 5G, Extinction Rebellion, blocking a Proxima store, saying it's going to be catastrophe because of the greenhouse gas emissions. Greenpeace France released a position on 5G, calling it a digital pollution that will increase carbon emissions, increase e-waste, strip the earth of natural resources, and contribute to human tragedies on a global scale. In Spain, Ecologists in Action issued a position statement. We have all of this on our website. We have impacts to trees. There's a study, radio frequency radiation injures trees around mobile phone base stations. These are trees before and after, years later. There's a cell tower over in this position. They followed dozens of trees and found damage to trees. And of course, trees are critical to climate protection and capture air pollution. And what are we doing? Here's that high school near me, Wheaton High School. Now, something people aren't aware of is that the companies themselves define wireless radiation as a pollution. This is an excerpt from Verizon Total Mobile Protection Insurance, where they exclude harm from pollution, and they define pollution as including artificially produced electric fields, magnetic fields, electromagnetic fields, sound waves, microwaves, and or all artificially produced ionizing or non-ionizing radiation and or waste. This is near me, an apartment building. This mushroom is in fact a cell tower installation. Absolutely unacceptable. The people are not informed. We have so many examples of environmental justice issues related to the siting of these antennas. Verizon warns their shareholders of the risk, but not their consumers or neighbors when they put up these installations. Here's a quote from their 10K filing for the taxes to the government. Our wireless business faces personal injury and wrongful death lawsuits related to the alleged health effects of wireless phones or radio frequency transmitters. We may incur significant expenses in defending these lawsuits. In addition, we may be required to pay significant awards or settlements. Companies warn their shareholders, but not their neighbors or the consumers who use their devices. Here's a cell tower, here's a house. People are not being informed. Crown Castle, all of the companies putting these networks up actually have such statements. Crown Castle says, we don't maintain any significant insurance with respect to these matters, because insurance companies won't insure for long-term damages, most from wireless radiation because of the risk. And they say if these emissions do cause negative health effects, potential future claims could adversely affect our operations, costs, or revenues, and you, the shareholders, might not get as much money. So there's all these white papers that deem the risk as high from wireless radiation. Swiss Re report had a 2019 paper on 5G rating it as off the leash high as an emerging risk. Here's a study. My gosh, our time is winding down, and I'll just run through a few things, but this was measurements done of 5G base stations in North Carolina. And these are some images from the paper, measurements of radio frequency electromagnetic fields, including 5G in the city of Columbia, South Carolina, USA. And they did measurements, and they found that the levels to people walking, as I showed you before, are very high from all of these antennas now being placed where we walk. There's a 5G, 4G antenna and people walking, and they took measurements all around. Yet we have no pre-market safety testing, no post-market surveillance for health effects, no reports or reviews on long-term exposure, no monitoring of what the radiation levels are in the country, not since the 1980s when the EPA last did a report on this. No budget, no government staff tasked to ensure cell towers are safe. And that really was confirmed in our court case against the FCC, because no federal agencies, not the EPA, NIH, not the Department of Labor, not the CDC, I'm going to talk about the FDA later, the FDA didn't have any reports that had looked at the issue. The FDA actually wrote a letter saying, basically, in summary, no worries, the NTP study isn't important, but there is no reports. There's a literature review that the FDA came out after the fact, which just looks at studies and attacks most of the studies that shows harm. But none of these agencies submitted an opinion on the science. There's been no systematic review, the totality of evidence on wireless radiation. No risk or hazard assessment done by any U.S. agency with health or environment or safety expertise. And in fact, you'll often hear, well, the World Health Organization, they say it's safe, but actually, if you take a look and you dig in just a little bit, there's the EMF project. They have these fact sheets online, totally different than the International Agency for Research on Cancer. These are two separate entities under the WHO. They actually haven't done a review on this since 1993. And in fact, there are a lot of questions about who has written and why these fact sheets remain online that make it seem like safety, when in fact there's been no health risk assessment since 1993 by the WHO EMF project. This is Chris Portier. He's retired director of the United States National Center for Environmental Health at the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. And he says, given the animal and experimental evidence, I assert that to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, the probability that radiofrequency radiation exposure causes gliomas and neuromas is high. I'm going to skip over some of my other things to hop to what can you do? How do you protect yourself? Well, the California Department of Health came out with a cell phone advisory after it was suppressed for many years and had to be a lawsuit to get it out. But do not sleep with your phone in your bed or near your head, it says. It explains how children are more vulnerable and explains when phones go to high power as well, which is when you're in an area of low signal or when you're FaceTiming compared to texting. Disable the Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and data options from your cell phone and devices when not needed, like the Athens Medical Association says, which has tips and recommendations on how to reduce exposure. So you want to learn what airplane mode is. You turn your phone to airplane mode and turn off all the wireless antennas, and that stops the radiation. Now, if you have to use your phone for something, don't have all those antennas on all the time blaring. You can't see them. They're very much always in use. Turn off what you're not needed. Don't put that device near your body. Have it away from your body and use corded connections whenever possible. But get to know the settings so you can turn it off. Turn it on airplane mode more. When you go to sleep, use a battery-powered alarm clock, not your cell phone. And don't charge your cell phone near the bed. Decrease those apps. Fewer apps means less radiation. They are often uploading and downloading and doing all kinds of things, even when you're not using the app. So don't have apps on your phone that you downloaded for free or whatever. Turn them off or set them to not always be updating. Minimize your overall use. Make shorter phone calls. Don't have that phone near your ear. And the Connecticut Department of Health does say, scientists also agree it is wise to reduce exposure to radio frequency energy from cell phones whenever possible. Keep the cell phones out of your pants. Make the bra a no cell phone zone. When you have large files or when you hand a child a device, as the American Academy of Pediatrics says, download the videos or whatever you're watching first, switch it to airplane mode in order to avoid unnecessary radiation exposure. Now in France, the French government has an order that you're informed that by your device to use hands-free. Children and adolescents should limit calls. Keep the equipment away from the stomachs of pregnant women and adolescents. This is my laptop and how I use it. I have it attached with a wire. This is an Ethernet. This is an adapter. I don't use Wi-Fi. I have Wi-Fi turned off on the device, and this cord goes all the way to my modem. And this way, the data, the information goes through the wire, not through my body. And that's a way to reduce exposure. You can also do it with a tablet. This my friend's son came over, wanted to be on the computer. We just hook it up with this adapter. Now, of course, companies should absolutely be making technology far more convenient to be wired. And that's something that we're working on at the federal level. But let me just share with you the resources we have on our website. You can go to Environmental Health Trust. We have downloadable fact sheets, step to step, each step on how to reduce exposure so that you can protect yourself at home. We have flyers and cards and all kinds of things you can print out, posters like this one on how to reduce exposure. We are on YouTube. We have an Instagram, a Facebook, a Twitter. I know that is rather ironic, but we found that we have to get the word out to people on the highways that exist right now and how to make those technology highways safer. So you can also contact us, info@ehtrust.org, for a presentation in your town, to your community, to your local group. We will go over whatever you're interested in, the science, how to reduce exposure, how you can take action on 5G, things you need to know about cell towers. We have information on what policy is worldwide on cell towers and resolutions to halt 5G and what's happening around the world. So go to ehtrust.org to learn more. So I can answer questions and talk about any other things that you might be interested in related to this issue. There's so many issues.
Well, thank you for all of that, Theodora, and just eye-opening and frightening and alarming and aggravating, and we're glad you're here to enlighten us. So yeah, I already see some questions coming in. Thanks again for sharing your website. I know that'll be a valuable resource for everybody. Just want to make sure everybody, and obviously some people already do, want to make sure everybody knows how we go about taking our questions for our Q&A session with you. So I'm just going to go over that real quickly. For those of you that don't know, we normally don't take questions directly from the chat. And what we do is we ask you to raise your hand. and your virtual hand, and we'll go ahead and take the questions with those raised hands in the order in which they come. So if you don't know how to raise your hand, down at the bottom of your Zoom window, there are different tabs. One of them is called a reactions tab. You can click on your reactions tab. And when you do that, a few different emojis pop up, and one of them is the raise hand function. You click on that, we will see your hand raised. We'll take them in the order in which they come in. And I will go ahead and call on your name, and I'll unmute you, and you'll be able to ask your question of Theodora Scarato. And Theodora, if you're ready, we'll go right ahead.
Yes, and I'm putting in the chat some links how to take exposure and so forth. So I hope that will be very helpful.
I'm certain it will. Thank you for doing that. That's great. And so with that, we're going to get started, and I'm going to go to Ruth. Ruth, I'm unmuting you, and welcome, Ruth.
Thank you. This has been absolutely fascinating, and I don't know where to begin. I know I'm surrounded by people who I don't think are going to pay very much attention to this, unfortunately, young grandchildren and stuff. But anyway, maybe I can make a start. I have two questions. The first one is, I'm in Canada, and I'm just wondering who I would contact here. The second question has to do with a Clarity phone that I have. We have it plugged in beside the bed. There's a plug, and then there's an attachment that goes into the wall, like into the phone. What do you call it?
Phone jack?
Yeah. There's a phone thing, and then there seems to be something attached to it, and then we have other phones that are attached to this around the house. So, but this one, this has a cord on it. So I'm just not understanding what kind of phone this is. It's a Clarity, and I don't know if I should remove it completely.
Well, does it have so this is my phone, does it have a curly cord?
It's got a curly cord on it, yes.
And it doesn't have any wireless capability.
Well, I think it might. I don't know. I'm not sure. How would I find out?
You could look it up. So it's called a Clarity phone.
Yes, it says Clarity Smart for seniors. It's an E814 amplified. Okay, no, corded phone with a digital answering machine, or is it just with digital? Cordless handset, optional, which we did buy quite a number of years ago.
So
power requirements. Yeah. Where I guess I should find this information in the back. Handset charger base.
Yeah. Okay. Handset charger base. So that means there are some phones that have a cord, but they also are a base that are wireless, where you have little, I didn't bring an example right here, but you have little handsets that are all around the house that connect to it.
Yes.
So that is a home cordless phone that also has wired. You want to actually not have that phone near your bed. And in fact, the base is emitting all the time. So I would replace that with all corded phones. If you need to have a cordless phone, at least unplug it when you're not using it, and certainly at night. That's like the first step people do, is at night. But home corded phones base, you really don't want anything wired or connected in the bedroom. However, you can have a regular corded phone in the bedroom that's connected with a wire, but not if it's a base. And a lot of people report when they get rid of, I know our family did, sleeping a lot better without all of this wireless. There are many phones that are amplified so that you can hear them, but are not wireless. But you do need to go online to get those.
What a big help, Theodora. Thank you for that. And Ruth, thank you for your question. And we're now going to move on to Ainsley, and I am unmuting you now. Hi, Ainsley.
Hi, morning, everyone. Ainsley from Trinidad. We're in the Caribbean. And I said in the chat, we have the little cell towers even at our bus stops. So it is actually, like, I should say, head level. You could write something on it. You can write an advertisement on these little cell towers But I am very angry right now. I'm not angry at you, but I mean at the information that we have now that has been harming us for so long. We have been trying so far to be healthy, doing the right thing, but we are being assaulted every day. My question to you is, have you ever approached one of those movie producers like Steven Spielberg to get this out there? I mean, we have reached this, I don't know, this movie like Bridget Fonda, point of no return, that when we speak, people say, that's nonsense. You're talking nonsense. But now we have somebody like you that can actually talk to these producers to get this out here. I mean, out there, but I mean, it's an assault. I'm disgusted by it, not at you. Thank you so much for sharing with us this morning. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And if you can reach Spielberg or any of the movie producers, please contact them, contact us, help us get the message out. We don't have the path to do that. We have been trying to, for example, reach Dolly Parton, because if you watch the Super Bowl, there was an advertisement where she pulled a cell phone out of her bra and said, we need to help these 5G phones. And what Miley Cyrus is doing a song about 5G phones. And yet, and we this is where we need to get to. Absolutely. And, I just had a call with a lot of the islands. There are people organizing. I talked to someone from Jamaica yesterday and the Cayman Islands. We've talked there. If you go to the other part of the ocean, we've done presentations to Bermuda when they were looking at this issue. The people, the community, they were all organized. We had the science, the policy. We had the former president of Microsoft Canada speaking on this issue. And yet they still went through and opened the door to cell towers and said, no harm proven. So this has got to change. If you are in your community and trying to make a change and people aren't listening to you, please go to our website, get the science to share with them, contact us. We are glad to meet with elected officials and in community meetings so everyone can be elevated with this information and share it. And I also meant to add, if you're in Canada, there's Canadians for Safe Technology. There's also Citizens for Safe Technology. And Frank Clegg is a Canadian, former Microsoft Canada president. And he has an organization working just like we are on this issue. So thank you. And we do need to, we are being occupied by our technology. It's occupying us. It's leading us. We should be leading how we want technology to be. It should not just be that we have what the drop-down menu offers us. We should be designing technology and be a part of the process, but we're being cut out for the bottom line.
Thank you, Theodora. Very interesting. It's almost like the thoughts of creating an Erin Brockovich type movie that calls out some of these things. And yet, even if you can get a hold of the producers, are they going to be so open to produce something like this when so much of Hollywood is funded by these industries? So tough, not an easy answer, right? I'm going to move on now to Annette. Annette, you are unmuted. Welcome.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. One is, my iPhone is still 4G. It's an iPhone 11. Is that as dangerous as the 5G? And the other question is, I wear hearing aids that are Bluetooth, and my phone calls are streamed through my hearing aids, of course, directly into my ears. Is that at a level of danger or health risk having hearing aids?
Okay, those are two good questions. I'll go to the hearing aids, and then your first question was.
I have 4G phone.
4G, okay.
iPhone 11, and I don't know. And plus, I have it charging on my nightstand right next to my head. I'm afraid of losing maybe an important phone call in the middle of the night. Anyway.
So yeah, if you can get a wired regular phone for your bedroom for emergencies, and you can forward your cell phone to the corded landline. Some of you may have a copper landline. Now, many of you will say, haven't had one of those in years. get a voice over IP or an internet phone, which I can't get a copper landline where I am at this point. I have to pay through my internet provider, and then that goes to the house, and then we have plugs in the house that it all connects. So there are a lot of tips and tricks. For some people, if you have to have a phone in the bedroom, please put it not near your bed, far away from your head. And you don't want to charge your cell phone, even if you're charging it without the wireless on, because actually there are extremely low frequency fields that come off of charging wires. So you want to have all electrical cords away from where you sleep. Related to your phone, the newer phones have more and more antennas, and they do more and more things, and they're harder to turn off those antennas. So we are very concerned about the new 5G phones. However, the 4G, 2G, and 3G, all of the Gs that are wireless radiation. So you want to try to reduce your exposure no matter what it is. In fact, if you have a 5G phone, you're probably using 4G technology, not the 5G for the most part, because most of those systems are for industry uses. Actually, they're using phones, but they also have like machine to machine or self-driving cars or drones or surveillance and all of these other things that are being put in communities, which have nothing to do with our phones, actually. So, but yet our phones can connect to it. So with all phones, you want to practice safer use of the cell phone. And if you have as I talked about, a cordless phone, go to wired. So to your Bluetooth. Sometimes, and all hearing aids are different, but sometimes they're just receivers. They're not transmitting. But what is transmitting is your cell phone. So you don't want to have that cell phone on your lap when something is being transmitted to your hearing aids. For each hearing aid, it's important to find out the make and model. Is it transmitting, which you need to look into that. Normally it's receiving. And we do recommend trying to not use wireless and keep it at a distance. And that is something that needs to be fixed. I mean, there are a lot of things we can do ourselves. We can make all these changes in our lives, but there's a lot of things we actually can't fix until we have a regulatory change, safer limits, till we have more rules for the companies so that they can make safer technology. It is possible, they can do it, but they need the people to be telling them what they want. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Theodora. We still have a number of questions left, if that's okay. We've got, and I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, I believe it's Kaylee. Hi, Kaylee.
Hi there. Please, in order for us to see all the entire important slides and PowerPoints that you're projecting, I think you will need, or Steve, somebody will need to make the screen, the slides smaller so that the black top and bottom of our screens don't take out a lot of what is being written underneath, so that we can read what you're saying. But the print that is coming on is actually on top of some of the important information on the slide, and the same thing with on the top. So that I think you have to adjust that screen, because we're missing on all these wonderful presentations, the top and bottom.
Kaylee, thank you for that. I am definitely, I know that our tech team is listening, so I'll make sure that they take a close look at that. We really, really appreciate that. Also, I'm not sure if this matters or not, but if you have a mouse, you want to make sure that you take the mouse off of the Zoom window, because that might reduce some of the tabs that are there. But I don't want to confuse the issue. I'm no expert, but thank you for that. And also, do you have a question for Theodora?
I go for the movie idea so much so that would be amazing if any of the people in Hollywood are listening, whether it's an actor, producer, writer, please go for it. That would reach people. That can look at what happened with Erin Brockovich. I mean, yes, please go for that. People who are listening, any connection, use it.
Thank you, Kaylee. Okay. So we are going to move now on to Marcus. Marcus E. I'm going to unmute you. Welcome, Marcus.
Thank you, Ben. And hi,
But Marcus, I hate to cut you off, but I don't know if you can turn your volume up. We hear you very faintly.
Is that true? Okay.
I think, any luck there, Marcus? Yeah, we can like hear you it's not there. Oh, there you go. Is that better?
Yeah. Is this better?
A little bit better. If you can go even more, that would be great. But yeah, we can hear you a bit better now. Thank you.
Okay, let me shout a little bit. Hi,
Thank you.
Theodora. For many years, about 16 years, myself and my wife, we have heard a low frequency hum. And at first we thought it was an external source. And over the years, we found many people in the Netherlands and then also worldwide who hear the same thing. It's a throbbing, low frequency sound, and there seems no source available. Do you have any thoughts on this? Can this be connected with wireless networks? What's your idea? Have you heard about this?
I have heard about that. There have been at different times, different publications on that, the hum. I don't know much about it and what it's related to. It must be something related to technology, but I don't have information on that. I do know that with people have developed auditory hearing of wireless technology where it sounds like clicks, but they can hear the different frequencies. That may be different than the hum.
Thanks very much, Theodora, for that. Let's go ahead now to Ed L. Ed, I'm unmuting you. Hi, Ed.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. I've been looking at this for some time and I was unsure until someone in one of the garden club lectures said that all these turkey oak trees were dying next to the Florida Turnpike, and he found out they were associated with the 5G towers being turned on. And he has absolutely no connection or interest in cell tower radiation. He's just a PhD agriculture guy who just observes things. So that's, I think, really convinced me that this is something that you have to treat like another threat to your health. Now, there are a lot of things one can do. I read Dr. McCullough's book on the 5G, but there's so many things to do. Can you give us a list of priorities? For example, if I want to run Ethernet cables, that's a big job. That's running hundreds of feet and threading, snaking them down through the walls. I could turn off the Wi-Fi, for example, at night, but that turns to be a challenge because I don't know, my UMA thing is like sucking all the bandwidth. So can you give us an order priority on what things we should try to go for to get the most bang for the buck?
Well, now my mom has UMA, which I set her up with, and we have no problem with we have the UMA. So UMA is a voice over IP, so you can have a telephone through your internet service, for everyone who's wondering. And you have to buy the hardware. Make sure that hardware is wired rather than wirelessly connecting to the router, and that it's wired connected to your phones. And then that should work. But there are other issues that come up with turning the Wi-Fi off at night. So sometimes you do need to take some time to learn about what you have and get maybe your own modem. We recommend getting your own modem. But I would start with reduce exposure to your cell phone. Go around your house. What do you have that's wireless? It's shocking what we have in our homes that's wireless. It's like picking apples off a tree. Next thing you know, it's like, oh, this. Get rid of whatever you are really not using. Turn the things off that you're not using all the time. Swap out the things which are wireless, with the wired corded technology. That's like the first thing. Get your bedroom set up. At a minimum, please, if you walk away from this talk, clear all the screens and electronics out of your bedroom. Have everything powered off at night in your bedroom. Make sure your head isn't against the wall with a utility meter on the other side. I didn't even talk about smart meters, but then with the internet, I thought it would be such a big deal to go wired in my home, but actually it was simpler than it seemed. Not in every situation. I've moved 3 times. I've had 3 situations, a lot of Ethernet cords. This isn't just to show people what we're talking about here. This is an Ethernet cord, and you can plug it in to an adapter, and then the radiation runs through the wire, not through your body. Those are important, but also getting involved in your community to make the change that really needs to happen, which is policy change. When I learned about this issue, I did not know who my elected officials were. I didn't know. I was not political. I wasn't. I voted for president, and I was very involved at work, working in domestic violence and in kids' mental health issues, but I wasn't involved in laws. I didn't even know how the government really worked. Actually, I had to kind of go back to class and realize, oh, this is how things work. Who is my city council person? And get to know them, meet them, make your voice be heard. This is very, very important. And it's part of like what we need to do to have a healthy earth. And I would recommend that, is getting involved in a group and educating people. So you heard about the trees. And I put, by the way, a link about trees and wireless radiation. Well, that was because someone spoke up and talked about it. We need to talk about this issue. Everything we do will make a difference on this issue. Ultimately, we need safer technology from the manufacturers and from the companies.
Thanks, Theodora. Sage advice. And now we're going to go over to Janet. Hi, Janet. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for this information. I know your website. Last night I listened to and saw the different places on your website. But the use of things, I think it's just so confusing because there is so many things that are wired versus Wi-Fi versus internet versus corded. Some have a base near you. Like, for instance, I was in sales. I used a headset on my head that allowed me to walk around the building while I was talking to people. That was wireless. It was in my ears. People have my son bought me an Apple Watch. He says, why don't you use it? I said, well, I only use it when I'm walking. When I want to monitor, I don't use it all day like you do. He was on Xbox for hours and hours with cordless headsets, talking to, his friends for hours on, with cordless remote controls in his hands. I just recently, about 6 months ago, got the new 5G iPhone, and I noticed when I'm holding it, whether it's charging or not, my fingers and my wrists, I could almost feel tingling. So I'm not sure if other people experience, I don't remember getting that type of tingling in my fingers and wrists when I used my 4G phone. So there's just so much information that we need to educate ourselves about. Is this all on your website in detail? I don't want to take up the time because your presentation covered a lot, but could you point us to, yes, it's on your website. This is what we need to do.
Yes, and I'll put it in again, a link to Technology Facts, How to Reduce Exposure, which is how to reduce exposure. And one of the issues is that because this is so much information, we are rising to the challenge of putting it on our website in a way that you can find what you need. And you may say, I can't find what I need. Go to the menu and look at what the drop down and to find what you're looking for, if it's science or how to reduce exposure or what you need to know. To your question of tingling, yes, oh my goodness, so many people have this issue of the tingling in their legs when they put the phone in their pocket, tingling or headaches when they put the phone up to their head. And there's research showing, headaches from cell phone radiation and from wireless. And the new phones some of them have warnings about pacemakers, right? They say, keep away from the pacemaker because of the magnetic fields. And yet they don't warn about our heart is keeping the beat. I mean, our bodies, every cell in our body is reverberating from whatever is in the environment, and we're not warned about that. So definitely keep the phone away from you. If you're having tingling or other symptoms like that, what I've heard from people who've developed electromagnetic sensitivity, also called microwave illness, is that's sort of the beginning signs. You don't want to then keep the devices near your body, because that can get worse to where you are not even able to it's more than tingling, it becomes more than tingling. So notice that if you're getting tingling, if you're getting headaches, if you're getting rashes from technology. Someone just wrote, my 5G iPhone makes my hands tingle and hurt. They travel up my arm if I continue to hold it. Remember that when you hold a device in your hand, the electricity and the electric field is going into your body. You actually can become part of the antenna itself. It's best to, if you have to use a phone, put it on a table on speaker away from your body. And we have to start using safer technologies whenever possible. Like you talking about your son and your family using devices. I use devices up to my head, on my body, my kids all the time. We've all been there. And you think of it like food. You can always start when you start. You just start, right? There's no time like the present to begin the process of making safer choices, healthier choices with food, just like with technology. You take each step and everything makes a huge difference. So
thank you for that. That makes a lot of sense, Theodora. We're going to move on now to Stephen. And Stephen, welcome.
Hello.
Hi, Stephen. We can hear you.
Hi, good morning. Thank you so much, Theodora. Could use an explanation of some of the terms that are used for the timeline for the 5G wireless. Things like we're in release 16 now, and the standards for release 17 are being presented, and release 18 is being studied this year. After that, after the standards, there's a pilot period and then a trial period before we get into the service period. I don't see anything about hearings for the public as these things, progress from stage to stage. What do these different stages mean to us?
Well, actually, I'm not quite sure. You're referring to standards development related to the technology. No, there are no hearings. There are no public times where we can come together and discuss, is this what we want to the companies? They are developing and putting forward the technology that works for them. And they are developing standards faster than we have safety standards for them. So I'm not sure if you're talking about in your community something that's going on, or kind of what industry is doing. So industry has all of these conferences, and they're talking about how to deal with trees. Trees get in the way of the higher frequencies. How do we address that? How do we deal with people being in the way? How do we deal with communities that say they don't want these in their communities? And industry has papers and information for policymakers promoting the technology without having it be really a democratic process where people have a say in the decision making. And they're already working on 6G and 7G and the higher frequencies that they want to use for these next generations that they have developed. And it's well before we're even told, before the people are told as to what they're doing. The companies are just doing what's best for them.
Thanks, Theodora. We're going to move on now to Sylvia. Sylvia, I'm unmuting you, and welcome.
Thank you. Good morning. My question is, I hope it's not a dumb question, but what about AirPods? My daughter, sons, they keep their AirPods on all day long, practically. Is that harmful?
Yeah, so we don't recommend AirPods because they are Bluetooth energy, which is radio frequency radiation. It's right near your brain, and they're emitting all the time. Some of the models actually have the one connects to the other, which connects to the phone, and that's your brain is in the middle. So while it is a lower level than a phone to your head, in fact, some of the newer Bluetooth can transmit very far and have much higher levels than previous Bluetooth transmissions. And we do not recommend that. We recommend speakerphone or wired air tube headsets instead of these very popular little white or whatever color they are, little ear pods. And that's super hard, right? Because our kids are like, my kids are like, Mom, so I don't buy them for them. And I'm always giving them safer technology to use. But that's a real challenge we have before us because, as you know, our youth, they are not thinking about the long-term effects quite often. So we have to talk about this with our kids.
I see tons of
That makes a lot of sense, Theodora. Thank you. And that is a challenge. It's talking to our kids and getting them to get on board with all of these thoughts. And it's just even socially, well, even if we can get our own kids to get on board, but then the peer pressure of their friends, families that don't know about this and they're not getting on board. How do we deal with that? What a challenge. That said, we're going to move on now to Janet. Janet, I'm going to unmute you. Welcome, Janet.
Thank you very much. I just had a question for you. If you do have wireless in your home, how can you protect yourself? Even if you were to use an Ethernet, which is a great idea, if you have a home, like a townhome where you're connected to other homes, or I have actually a business right in front of me, like a coffee shop and a pharmacy that have their wireless going on all the time. Is there anything you can do to protect yourself? Like, is there any shielding you could put on yourself or anything you can do for that? And my second question is, I know we talked about things like the iPhone watch, but what about the Aura ring? A lot of people sleep with that and keep it on their fingers to monitor themselves. I'm not sure if you know if that has wireless technology as well. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you. So wireless wearables are a real situation and they are transmitting all the time, but some of them actually can go on airplane mode. And so you want to check that the model of the ring or of the fitness monitor and so forth, that they can go on airplane mode where you can turn the continuous transmissions off. And what some people do who want to use these devices is only turn it on when they choose to. And then it does the transmitting, sending the information, but then they turn off the transmission. So you call up the manufacturer before you purchase on those products. Related to devices, and I lived in a condo many times with this issue and dealt with many different interesting situations. I know people in apartments who've dealt with it. So the first thing to know is what you do in your home, no matter where you are, will make a huge difference because distance is important. You're dealing with those things that are really close to you. The closer a device is, the more intense rates of absorption into your body, be it to your head or here. So do take those steps in your home. Then what do we do when, like my house, it was like a condo situation, like a row house, and my neighbor had all of these routers and so forth. One time in a home we lived in, those were not so close to the wall where we lived. Another time, the neighbor had it right up against the wall, like must have had, I don't know how many things. In fact, I went in there once and she had tons of things right there on the wall. And she said, I'm not a mom. I'm not worried about it. I'm not going to make these changes for you. When I went and asked her to make some changes, which of course was kind of seemed outrageous, I'm sure, for some. But so we ended up needing to put some shielding up because of that situation. What you can do, however, we only recommend you do that if you have the help of an expert, a building biologist. They're trained make sure they're trained in electromagnetic radiation or another electromagnetic radiation expert who can take measurements like with a meter and make sure that the shielding is doing what you want it to be doing. But if it's far away, you're not getting as much as you might think. Even if you can see all of those Wi-Fi networks, it is not the same as having a lot of Wi-Fi routers right near your body. So like sleeping with the Wi-Fi router like my friend had in her baby room, her nursery of her child, the Wi-Fi router was right there. So I recommend getting a meter to know what your levels are. This is a Safe and Sound Pro 2. And I'll just show you if I turn on the Wi-Fi, what happens. Turn it on. Turning it off, and I'll turn on the Bluetooth for a second. And there's also another meter called an acoustometer. There's meters that measure magnetic fields as well. So you can sort of know what you're dealing with. And you might look into shielding if that is something that would work for you.
Thanks very, very much for that. And that was interesting to see for those of us that haven't seen those meters before, to really see that in action. It's picks it right up. Up next, we have David A., and I'm going to unmute you. Hi, David.
Hi, how you doing?
Great, welcome.
Thank you. Theodora, I was wondering what your policy is regarding dirty electricity as far as putting certain filters on the outlets. And also, just as a FYI, as I recall, I saw something on 60 Minutes about microwave radiation dealing with U.S. Embassy personnel. I say that because you might want to talk to 60 Minutes, since it's all you're focusing on microwave radiation as well, and then maybe they'll interview you or Deborah about that.
Thank you. And yes, we have been attempting that conversation. We have had people who have been approaching 60 Minutes on that. And just to tell everyone what you're talking about, Havana syndrome, it's being called. There are diplomats, US diplomats in other countries that are developing neurological problems and dizziness, headaches, all symptoms which, when we talk about electromagnetic sensitivity, which is people who are developing symptoms that are disabling from exposure to wireless. But here we have these diplomats that suddenly became sick. And in fact, they've done studies looking neurologically at the issue and found impacts to the brain that look like injuries, only there's nothing it has to be an invisible something that's doing this. And the National Academy of Sciences took a look at this issue and issued a report saying it very possibly is microwave radiation, possibly unknown. Is it surveillance? But actually, diplomats from Canada and other diplomats of other countries are having similar situations. So that's what this story was on. You can look it up. You can go to our website to find out, look up Havana or Cuba diplomats, and you'll see those resources. So we have been trying to work that, I have to tell you. And a lot of these people, of course, when they went to their doctors, they've been dismissed as, what is that? But then the studies have been showing that there is something going on here. And, years ago, it was found out that there was Russia was actually spying on US diplomats, and there was a signal, the Moscow signal, that was going to the diplomat's office that was recorded. So back to your second question, dirty electricity. Okay, so this is a big bucket issue. Wireless radiation, non-ionizing electromagnetic fields, and there's also magnetic fields, and then there's dirty electricity, also known as harmonics, or situations where the electrical system in your house is contaminated by other impacts. It can be from outside your home, like your neighbor has, I didn't mention dimmer switches, or a lot of devices in their home that creates dirty electricity, and dimmer switches are really an issue, as well as certain kinds of motors. and your laptop charger, the little box transformers create dirty electricity or harmonics in the electrical system in your home. The first thing we recommend for dirty electricity is removing the sources. Before we get into filters and all of that, is just cleaning up the electrical system. Now, sometimes, just like we talk about with Wi-Fi, you need to have, like right now, my computer is charging because it was low. I like to use my computer not charging, but because I'm doing a talk and I didn't want it to run out like yesterday night, I have it plugged in. But unplug all those transformers and things when you're not using them. Have them on a power strip. And there is a company called, there's Safe Living Technologies for meters, but Tech Wellness, which has these power strips which are shielded so that you're not getting the electrical fields, and then you can just turn off, click them off when they're not in use, so that that's not going into your electrical system. Smart meters, you want to get an analog meter. So remove those sources first. Oh, you know what? We had a plug-in carbon monoxide, little $35 carbon monoxide detector plugged into the circuit. We had someone come to our house. They had a special, they could look at all the oscillations in the electricity, and they were finding these high levels. And I was like, gosh, when I bought the house, we didn't have all of this. What's going on? What could it be? Turned out it was that $35 plug-in CO2 monitor. So then, of course, we got battery-powered monitors and swapped it out. But we didn't know that that was contaminating all the electricity in the home. So that's what we would recommend. There's a lot of issues around filters. Sometimes if you do use a filter, it can create magnetic fields near the filter. And I can't speak, I don't have the expertise on those specifically. I mean, some people say they work, some people say they don't work as much as you think they do. Sometimes there's frequencies that's not going to catch. So remove the sources. We have a section on our site on dirty electricity and harmonics. And if you go to the section, I'll put it in the chat, on magnetic fields, we also talk about that. So you can swap those things out and have cleaner technology.
Thank you very, very much for not only that, Theodora, but this entire presentation has just been, again, very eye-opening for all of us and meaningful. And we appreciate you being the stand that you are for all of us. We've basically come to an end in terms of our Q&A session, and we thank you for being here last night. We thank you for being here today. We thank you for coming back again this year. And I know I'm not the only one that wants to thank you. I'm going to have my tech team unmute our entire audience. What do you want to say to Theodora Scarato, everyone?
We love you.